Diabetes could really be thought of as the Black Death of the 21st century.
Hello, True Health Seekers, and welcome to another exciting episode of the Learn True Health podcast. Today, I have with us one of the doctors that is interviewed in the I Thrive documentary series. I'm about to play a clip from the I Thrive documentary series. It's going to be launching in a few days. I want you to get it for free. It follows a man who reverses his obesity and his diabetes naturally using all natural medicine with these expert doctors around the world. It's absolutely mind-blowing. It's so moving. It's so inspiring. It's so motivating. If you know anyone that suffers from diabetes or weight issues, they need to see this. Have them go to learntruehealth.com/iThrive and sign up for free to watch the entire docuseries. That's learntruehealth.com/iThrive.
I tell people, I used to say after the age of 40, now it's like after the age of 10, what you do determines how you want to die. You with type 2 diabetes, you may not have known this, but you were making choices that said, I'd like to have some amputations, I'd like to have my kidneys fail, I'd like to go blind, I'd like to have peripheral neuropathy, and then I'd like to die.
Wow, that hit me like a hammer in the chest as I sat there and took it all in. Yeah, I'm the fat one on the left. I reflected on my life. I never thought in a million years I would end up in this position. 120 pounds overweight, out of control type 2 diabetes, heart attack, severe neuropathy in my feet. I burned them in a bonfire and didn't even feel it. Numbness spreading to my hands and joints, blurring vision, borderline kidney disease, ED, yeah. I'm the only one that will actually admit to being part of Viagra's $2 billion market share. It'd be funny if it wasn't true. Then there's brain fog, and worst of all, anxiety and crippling depression. I'm John McMahon, and this is my real-life story. It's raw and it's real because I want to get real about my health and thriving again. I want the same for you too, and I had to get it out to you as soon as possible. I have diabetes and I'm morbidly obese. I'm 120 pounds overweight, and I've seen the decline of my health rapidly accelerating. I already had one heart attack and my triglycerides were almost 900. Yes, that's very, very bad. I wasn't even sure if I could make it through this documentary with all this on my shoulders. 50% of us in the United States have diabetes or prediabetes, and 70% of you don't even know it. This is a very serious epidemic. For you and your children and the ones you love, please listen to every word you're about to hear in this series.
To get access to the entire series for free, visit learntruehealth.com/iThrive or go to the show notes of the podcast today and you'll see the link there. Share it with as many friends as you can who have diabetes, heart disease, and or obesity, because in this docuseries, they uncover the true way that we can get to the heart of this matter to help heal our body, come back into balance, no longer have diabetes, no longer have obesity, eradicate heart disease, all naturally using diet and lifestyle. It's very, very exciting. You'll get a taste of it with today's interview. Enjoy the show. Welcome to the Learn True Health podcast. I'm your host, Ashley James. This is episode 230. We're in for such a treat today. We have with us a wonderful doctor. Dr. Alan Goldhamer is both a chiropractor and an osteopathic doctor. That is so amazing. In fact, this is the first time I've ever talked to a chiropractor and an osteopath. I've had a lot of, chiropractors and naturopaths or osteopaths and maybe acupuncture. I love those combinations when a doctor wants to further their tool belt with all the holistic medicine they can possibly grab onto. It's going to be very interesting to talk to you today, Dr. Alan Goldhamer. So because you have this unique perspective from the chiropractic world and from the osteopathic world, and also I love that you specialize in this very interesting type of detox and cleansing through diet and through fasting. So this is going to be a very interesting show today. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love for you to start by sharing your story. What led you to want to pursue this career? When did you go into chiropractic first, or did you become an osteopath first? And what led you to want to jump into this field and help people in this way?
Well, actually, originally, I remember I was in fourth grade, and I remember being very frustrated because my best friend, Doug Lyle, used to beat me in basketball consistently, and I decided I wanted to beat him. And even though I practiced, it didn't seem to help, so I thought I'd get healthier. And I happened to come across a book by Herbert Shelton, who was one of the early natural hygienists, and he talked a lot about diet and health from healthful living and fasting. And I got very interested thinking that that would give me the edge that it would take to beat Doug in basketball. And of course, I fully adopted the program, but it completely failed because he adopted the same program. And to this day, we still play basketball together these many decades later, and he still beats me every time we play. So I'd have to say it was a total failure. But it did get me interested in health and healthful living. I met a doctor who actually was a chiropractor when I was about 16, and he said that he had the best job in the whole world because the body did all the healing and the patient did all the work, and all he had to do was take credit for the good results. And I decided that that was the job for me. And so I went to chiropractic college and enjoyed that. I went to in Oregon, to Western States Chiropractic College, and learned all about diet, nutrition, chiropractic care. But it didn't give me the background that I wanted to be able to take on the treatment of certain kinds of conditions. And so I had a chance to go to the Pacific College of Osteopathic Medicine in Australia and study with Alec Burton, who at the time was the person that had the most experience using medically supervised water-only fasting and treating conditions like high blood pressure and diabetes and autoimmune diseases. And so I went over there and I did my training and I did a residency with him, and I got a chance to work with hundreds of patients that had sicknesses. And what was amazing is they kept getting well. And so I had been trained that a lot of these conditions, there really wasn't much you could do and they were going to be sick forever, et cetera. And I saw them getting well. And so I came back in 1984 with my wife, Dr. Jennifer Morano, and we opened up the True North Health Center. And so for the last 33 years, we've been helping people recover their health using diet and lifestyle modification. And uniquely at the True North Health Center, we use medically supervised water-only fasting. And that's long-term fasting up to 40 days.
Wow, fascinating. Now, I first heard about you through the documentary series I Thrive. My understanding is one of the creators of I Thrive went through your program recently and did the fast. Is that correct?
Yeah, he's actually here right now. Yeah, he did 32 days of fasting, and he's still here recovering. And he's broadcast a series on the reversal of diabetes using diet and fasting and very conservative measures.
That is so exciting. My understanding is that the statistics now in the United States and in many other industrialized nations that 1 in 3 people are diabetic or pre-diabetic, that we're really moving in the wrong direction as a society. And the idea that you, in your clinic, are able to help people reverse diabetes naturally, reverse high blood pressure, autoimmune conditions, and many conditions using this type of fasting, and then of course afterwards you teach them how to eat healthy so they don't just go home and continue the same patterns. But it's really exciting because there's no medication on the market that's going to cure high blood pressure, cure diabetes, cure autoimmune conditions. There's no drug. All those drugs just do is manage the symptoms, but they keep the disease. And you have a program that ends the disease. Is that correct?
Well, I think we have a program that ends the disease, but only as long as you're willing to do dangerous and radical things like eat well, exercise, and go to bed on time. Because just like the limitations with medications, which clearly don't cure these conditions, in fact, it's interesting. If you have diabetes or hypertension or you have autoimmune disease, your physician will tell you that what you need to do is take 1 to 5 drugs. And if you do exactly what you're told, they'll promise you, they'll guarantee you, you'll never get well. You'll be sick for the rest of your life. That's the promise of conventional treatment of these conditions. Now, we're offering an alternative approach, which says that so long as you're willing to eat well, exercise, and go to bed on time, you can get healthy enough that you can eliminate the need for medications in most cases. And so most of our patients were able to completely eliminate medication by eliminating the reason why they needed the medication. And of course, along with getting rid of the medication, you also get rid of the side effects, the chronic cough, fatigue, the impotence, and death that's associated with taking many of these medications. So it's still a management strategy. It's just managing it with healthful living rather than exogenous pharmaceutical agents that have oftentimes tremendous side effects.
Now, I've heard that fasting can be dangerous. I knew a naturopath who said his best friend died because he did a 60-day fast, but he didn't do anything to support the emunctory systems. He didn't do anything really beyond just drinking water and not eating. And he ended up developing cancer. And so this naturopath considered that maybe he developed this cancer because the fasting caused his body to release all of the toxins that were stored, but the toxins didn't have anywhere to go. And so there's this consideration that fasting can kind of release all of the environmental toxins and pollutants that are stored in the body. If you don't support the liver, support the way to get it out, that it can be more dangerous. So how do you combat this?
Well, it's just, a lot of people believe a lot of things. Just because people believe it doesn't mean it has any basis in truth. And in fact, we've done what's called a fasting safety study. So we assess the safety of water fasting by reviewing and characterizing what are called adverse events experienced by patients at True North over a 5-year period. And this is a paper that was submitted to a peer-reviewed index journal, has been accepted for publication, will be coming out here in a few weeks. And we use the common terminology criteria for adverse events from the National Cancer Institute to evaluate all of the patients that had been through this fasting protocol over a period of 5 years. And under the CTCAE grading system, you grade the adverse events grades 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 being death, 4 being life-threatening, etc. And what we found after doing an exhaustive safety study is that fasting is safe as long as you follow appropriate protocols. And the appropriate protocols and things include that, number one, patients be appropriately screened, that you have a physical exam, laboratory assessment, and monitoring. At the True North Health Center, all patients undergo medical evaluation. They're all seen twice a day by our staff doctors, where we evaluate their clinical presentation twice a day. We use appropriate laboratory monitoring. And when you do that, as our safety study has clearly shown, this is a safe and effective experience. We've had 16,000 people undergo medically supervised water-only fasting in the past 33 years. We have no Category 5 events, that is, no deaths. There are very few complications, all of which so far, fortunately, have been easily managed. For example, we did have one Category 4 event, which is a serious event, where a person's sodium levels can drop too low, and that had to be managed by providing intravenous feed. But they have a good outcome, and it's a relatively easily managed clinical consequence, and it's rare. The vast majority of people that undergo fasting do so safely, and it can be extremely effective, as other studies that we've published looking at conditions like hypertension, for example. In high blood pressure, we had 174 consecutive patients that underwent fasting, and 174 people lower their pressure enough to eliminate the need for medication. And at the True North Health Center, we're seeing a wide variety of conditions. So it's not just cardiovascular, hypertension, or autoimmune. We're also treating people with endocrine, neurological, psychiatric complications. There's substance abuse issues, the whole gamut of conditions that are typically seen by doctors in our society today. And the fact is, fasting's safe. Now, I would love to see the data that suggests that that's not safe. What you usually find is these people have proprietary products, and they'll say fasting is dangerous because the body and its billion years of evolution don't know what it's doing. And the only way you can do fasting safely is if you take their proprietary products. So fasting is dangerous unless you take the $39.95 a bottle pill, potion, or powder. Then, of course, it's perfectly safe. The fact is, fasting's been used for a long, long time. Moses, David, Elijah, Jesus were said to have fasted up to 40 days. And many of our patients fast in that duration. In fact, I tell my patients that they're probably in good company. The fact that fasting is recognized by virtually most religious traditions as an important component is there probably for a reason, because fasting is a biological adaptation. So let's think about it. If it wasn't for fasting, and the ability of humans to fast, our species could not have done what we've done, which is wander away from the tropics. If you look at something like a chimpanzee, they can't fast. That is, their brain doesn't change from burning glucose to burning fat, the hallmark of fasting adaptation. And as a consequence, you'll never see the chimps wandering away from the tropics because they have to have a constant source of fuel. If they go to a place and spring comes late and there's nothing to eat, they die. Human beings, because of the biological adaptation of fasting, we can go up to 70 days or longer without eating because our brains change from burning what the normal fuel is, glucose, to burning something called fat, or specifically beta-hydroxybutyric acid. So the fact that our brains are bi-fuel and they can change fuels is why we're able to go for long periods of time, because it's our brain that's the major burner of glucose in the body. So if you can't convert to burning fat, then what would happen is you would have to break your proteins down to provide glucose, and after a period of time you would die. So fasting, the fact that it's a biological adaptation, it means everybody can fast, with the exception of somebody that has, for example, a genetic defect like MCAD, medium chain acetocoenzyme A dehydrogenase deficient. Those people can't fast because they don't have the ability to break down fatty acids. That's 1 in 10,000 people. But the rest of us can fast because all the humans that couldn't fast died. They didn't make it. They didn't pass on their genes. The people that survived, the ones that could wander away from the tropics, the ones that survived inevitable food deprivation, the times when spring came late, were people that could fast. And that's who your ancestors were. That's who you are. And when you have a biological adaptation, you can be quite confident that this is something that the body is well equipped to being able to do.
I love your answer because I was just talking to a friend the other day about the ketogenic diet. I've done it several times. I don't do it all the time. I've done it like 4 months at a time. And we were out to dinner, and my friend said, "Oh, you're not eating that way, but I see you eating food that you didn't eat that way." And I said, "Yeah, I did ketosis. I did the ketogenic diet. Now I'm doing something else." And he says, "Do you think we're really supposed to do that? Like, do you think our body is supposed to burn fat instead of glucose?" I said, I was like, absolutely. It makes sense that we're sort of like those engines that can burn diesel or gasoline, that the body has that ability to adapt. And I love how you put it, is that we wouldn't have been able to travel long distances or travel away from the tropics if it wasn't. Think about the Inuits, the Eskimos, those that have been able to live for long periods of time just on the blubber of seals alone.
But I would
So
mention, though, that their particular life expectancy isn't particularly long. So the fact that you can do something doesn't mean you should do it necessarily indefinitely. And the fact is that if your average age of death is 30 or 40 or 45 years old, you don't worry about the long-term consequences of a, say, high-fat, high-protein diet. So, people can go on the dead Dr. Atkins diet and they may be able to do some short-term weight loss. It doesn't necessarily mean that's going to promote health over the long run. And so we really want to take a look at who are the long-lived peoples and what do we know from science is consistent with long-term healthy survival, not just how long you live, but also how well you live, which is the healthy life expectancy, probably even more important to most people. And we know from that literature that a whole food, plant-centered diet free of SOS is likely to be the best diet to sustain the most health for the most people over the most time. SOS, of course, is the international symbol of danger, and it also stands for salt, oil, and sugar, the chemicals that we add to food that fool the satiety mechanisms of the brain and lead people to get fat, sick, and miserable. Now, one of the things that I believe people are doing when they're going on these high-protein modified fasting diets is they're kind of taking advantage of the fact that when people are in ketosis, like in fasting, it tends to blunt hunger. And so they're utilizing this as a little bit of a trick to help the body reduce its caloric load without a lot of hunger. If you think about hunger, part of what hunger is your brain telling your body that you're hemorrhaging strategic fat reserves, that you're losing your fat stores. Your brain's not necessarily happy about that. Your brain worked hard to stimulate you to eat enough food to store those extra fat reserves so if spring came late, you'd survive. Anytime you're losing weight, your brain is triggering your body a little warning signal that, hey, you're losing fat. Be careful. If you keep this up, eventually you'll die. So I'm not sure the brain is necessarily happy about you giving up fat stores. And as a consequence, if you blunt that brain message by, say, going on a high-fat diet, you may be able to reduce caloric intake with less of that difficulty. And that certainly happens in fasting. People are not hungry during long-term water-only fasting. And part of being in that ketotic state is the blunting of hunger. I wouldn't recommend people water fast indefinitely, because eventually, when you've used up your fat stores, you enter a process called starvation, and then you die. And that's why we don't do starvation at the True North Health Center, because it would be really bad on our outcome data. So we avoid that, and we carefully monitor people to make sure that they're always safely within their their reserves. And that's where the problem comes in. The criticism of fasting, which I think is legitimate, is when fasting is not done in a controlled setting, it can actually create complications and problems. Complications and problems that we work very hard to avoid by being in a medically supervised, controlled environment setting, with working with people that we know from screening are good candidates for this process.
So, how long does someone need to fast before they're not hungry again? I think a lot of people who would be interested in fasting are also afraid of fasting because they're afraid of being hungry.
Yeah, it turns out hunger is not the thing that bothers people. By the second or third day, most people have virtually no hunger. So hunger is like, there's a lot of things we can talk about that people should be concerned about, but hunger really doesn't turn out to be a big problem for most people. And it's the same mechanism by which these high protein modified
Right.
fasting diets work, is that people's hunger is blunted. Listen, people in our facility right now today, they're day 3 in the fast, are down attending cooking classes, interacting with people during meals. It doesn't even bother them. And yet, they haven't eaten for several days.
Amazing. So, someone who hasn't eaten for 3 days can attend a cooking class and not want to like tear someone's head off?
Absolutely enjoy it. Absolutely enjoy it. And that's particularly true if they've prepared well before the fast. I tell my patients that, look, fasting can be an intense and miserable experience. But if you want to mitigate that and prepare yourself so that you can have a pleasant experience, what you need to do in preparation for fasting is avoid meat, fish, fowl, eggs, dairy products, oil, salt, sugar, coffee, alcohol, all the pleasure trap chemicals that people eat that lead them into the problems that they're having. If they can get several days of compliance before they start fasting, whether they do it before they arrive at the center or after they arrive at the center, then when they go into fasting, it can be a rather smooth transition. Most of the symptoms people get when they fast are not inherent to fasting. What they are is caffeine withdrawal, alcohol withdrawal, greasy, fatty, slimy, dead, decaying flesh withdrawal. And so if you've kind of worked those withdrawal effects out before you start fasting, you find out that fasting itself can actually be a rather pleasant experience. Listen, I fast every year. I hate fasting because you have to rest. It bothers me in that regard. But as far as symptoms, you get very little symptoms. If you've lived healthy all year long, fasting actually is a rather pleasant experience.
Wonderful. Let's talk a little bit about the SOS. I think a lot of people understand why sugar is bad. Why is salt bad? Do you think salt, like naturally occurring salt, are you against all salt, or is it just the salt that
Well,
they add to all the processed food?
yeah, sodium is an essential nutrient without which you die. So, and in fact, it's such a critical and limiting nutrient that your body is designed to detect it at very small quantities. In fact, that's part of the reason some things are really healthy for you, because you can taste the natural sodium, even though it might be relatively mild in things like vegetables, etc. Now, what we learned to do relatively recently in our history is to concentrate in processed materials to make salt, just like we did sugar. Sugar tells you fruit's good. Salt tells you vegetables are good. But when you concentrate it, it artificially stimulates the dopamine production in the brain, and dopamine is the neurochemical associated with pleasure, and it leads to overeating. That's why people are fat and sick, because we eat salt, oil, and sugar. Salt, for example, has a whole bunch of problems when it's introduced in high concentration. Normally, you would be getting about 0.5 milligram of sodium per calorie, but people in our culture are often eating 2 to 5 milligrams of sodium per calorie, or even more. And as a consequence, sodium, for example, is a highly toxic agent. If you give a person a tablespoon, it's an emetic. It makes them throw up. If you give them enough, they die. What we do, and we put salt in the food, is the body has to hold fluid to neutralize and compensate for it, and that's why the blood volume goes up, and that's why blood pressure goes up. And about 1/3 of people are really efficient at doing this, and so they're what we call salt sensitive. So when they eat salt, they get high blood pressure, which is one of the reasons why blood pressure is so common, that the majority of people 65 or older have hypertension. It's not healthy, but it's normal. It's normal or average, which is why you don't want to be normal. You want to be healthy, and healthy people don't have obesity and they don't have hypertension. Salt also helps us get fat because it stimulates what's called passive overeating. So it'll allow you to eat more before you feel satisfied than you would without it. For example, if you just ate rice to your full, you eat a certain amount. Salt it up, you'll find you'll eat more before you reach satiety. So salt also causes other issues. There's a whole list of physiological consequences of excess sodium, but the biggest thing it's a stimulant to overeating. It contributes to hypertension and fluid retention, which contributes to joint pain, edema, swelling, non-healing wounds, congestive heart failure, respiratory issues, etc. So we want to avoid added salt. You get all the sodium you need by eating a diet derived exclusively from whole plant foods. You don't have to add chemicalized, highly processed food. And it doesn't matter if it's regular salt or pink salt blessed by the guru. Sodium chloride still dissociates to sodium and chloride and contributes to the same problems. And the same thing can be said about fat. You need essential fatty acids in your diet. If you don't get enough, you die. But you get all the fat you need from whole natural foods. So fruits and vegetables, and particularly rich in things like nuts and seeds and avocado. In fact, it's so rich in those foods that we recommend portion controlling those products, because you can get too much, even whole natural foods, if they're too rich in the fats, for example, like nuts and seeds. You can overdo those. And of course, you acknowledge that sugar may be a problem. It doesn't mean you can't have a piece of fruit, even though it contains natural amounts of sugar, but you don't want to concentrate it. For example, if you just eat oranges, and you have an orange or two or three, eventually you get full of eating oranges. But you have a glass of orange juice, you have the equivalent of 6 oranges worth of sugar in it. And if you take that and further concentrate it and turn it into, actual refined carbohydrates in the form of sugar, you increase the threshold even further. If you eat an apple, that may provide good support for the 5 pounds of bacteria that live in your intestinal tract. But you eat sugar, and it can change not only the type of bacteria living in your intestinal tract, but their poo. And what you got to be careful is if you feed the bacteria that live in your gut the wrong foods, instead of getting fertilizer like vitamin K, you can get things like TMAO, which is trimethylamine oxidase, which is a powerful inflammatory irritant, which leads to heart disease and cancer, etc. And that's largely determined by what you feed the bacteria that live in your gut. If you've got 5 pounds of living bacteria in your gut giving off waste products every day, and you feed them soluble fiber and you get fertilizer, that's good. You feed them meat, fish, fowl, eggs, dairy products, and you get TMAO, that's bad. But you've got to remember how important it is what you're feeding the organisms, because if you break your body down into human tissues and foreign tissues, it turns out there's more foreign tissues than human tissues. You're actually more bacteria, viruses, protozoa, etc., than you are human flesh. And so your relationship with these organisms that make up the majority of your body are very, very important.
So my understanding in fasting is that the microbiome sort of dies off because you're not feeding it for 40 days. Is that a good thing in a way that and is that true? Does the microbiome die and then you have to rebuild it after a fast?
Well, it's like rebooting the hard drive on a computer. If you have a corrupted computer and then you turn it off and turn it on, a lot of time it starts working properly. And you don't exactly know why necessarily, where the corruption was. When you go on a fast, you're rebooting the system. Yes, there is a certain change in population, and more importantly, what that population of bacteria are giving off. And then when you start eating, it repopulates, but hopefully with the right type of bacteria that support health instead of the wrong type of bacteria that have been fed by sugar, salt, oil, and highly processed crap.
I interviewed Jeffrey Smith, who is a creator of anti-GMO documentaries and really GMO awareness, and he discussed that there was a study in Canada where they found that after eating GMO foods, specifically the corn, the BT corn, right? BT corn is meant to create the BT toxin, which explodes the stomach of insects. And so they don't, so the insects don't eat the corn, and then they can spray it with lots of other, chemicals, because it's also like resistant to those chemicals. They discovered that when we eat that corn, that the GMO genes got into the bacteria of the gut, and the bacteria of the gut started creating the BT toxin inside of people. They could no longer eat corn, and their body was still very concentrated in the BT toxin. So it almost like the genetic makeup hijacked their gut. And at that point in time, I wanted to just chug a bottle of bleach to kill it. Right? I was like, "Oh my gosh, we have to reset this.
Well, I
we
would
have
recommend
to kill
against chugging a bottle of bleach, because that's not going to be a health promoting way of rebalancing the gut microflora. I think
Right.
that fasting and a healthy diet is probably a better strategy. And it does raise the issues that I think are quite controversial, but certainly interesting, about the role that genetic manipulation could play when what we're doing is not trying to figure out how to make plants healthier, but figuring out how to make plants more resistant to chemicals produced by companies that make large amounts of money selling those chemicals.
Exactly. And so many people could have basically their gut biome might have been hijacked by GMOs. Or like you said, they're because of what they're eating, their gut biome is pooping out something that is incredibly toxic to the body, and a great way to reset that is a fast, and then accompany it after the fast with a plant-based, whole foods diet, free of salt, oil, and sugar.
Well, that's certainly what we see clinically. That if you have people where we know we have gut leakage, they have elevated zonulin, they have other objective markers of, gut leakage. They've done the lannulose test, whatever. If you take those people, you put them through fasting, get them on a whole food, exclusively whole food plant diet, free of SOS, their clinical symptoms begin to improve. Now, as far as the science is pretty new. We've just completed a study with our colleague Luigi Fontana at Washington University, where we looked for the first time at the microbiome before, during, and after long-term water-only fasting. We took stool samples to evaluate changes in both the type of flora and what the flora are giving off. And that research we've just finished the sample collection, and that data is being processed currently. So we should have some interesting papers coming out looking at exactly what really is happening. Right now, you hear a lot of speculation, particularly from people selling products, but I don't know that the hard data is compelling yet or ready for prime time.
Exciting. Now, are there any oils that are healthy? Like there's a lot of controversy around coconut oil and that it has a lot of health benefits. So what are your
Well, there's
thoughts?
a lot of controversy about coconut oil from people hyping and selling coconut oil, but oils are oils are oils. Anytime you take a food, rip it apart, and take a fractionated component out of it, whether it's sugar, oil, or salt, you have a highly fractionated component. That's what we're arguing against. So
Mm.
yes, if you want to have some fresh coconut or you want to have some whole food of any kind, we're not going to argue that so much as long as quantities are reasonable. But as soon as you rip the cells apart and start coming up with highly processed, very expensive, and very lucrative food byproducts, then we're going to argue that that's probably not going to be health promoting. And the fact that this week's fashion is coconut everything doesn't make it any better. These are highly saturated oils that are highly processed, in that form, and we would argue against them as a component of the health promoting diet.
Can you explain? So, just wrapping our brains around your diet, which is not, I mean, it's not controversial. I've had several other guests on the show say that this is the optimal way to eat. So, it's just, it makes sense. But I think wrapping our brains around how could we cook? I mean, everyone starts cooking with oil, or
Yeah,
they
you
put
don't
oil
need
or
any.
butter in a pan.
Yeah, you don't need any oil to cook healthfully. You can use any liquid. We call it steam frying. You can use any liquid, whether it's a soup stock that you make or water. Any liquid will allow you to steam fry vegetables and develop textures and flavors that are excellent. If you really want a lot of recipes that are completely SOS free, you can look at either of our books, the Health Promoting Cookbook or the Bravo Cookbook. And none of those recipes use any meat, fish, fowl, eggs, dairy products, oil, salt, or sugar. And yet the recipes are simple enough, even I can make them. They taste great, and they rely exclusively on the natural flavors associated with whole natural foods.
Excellent. That's really exciting. Can you walk us through what you eat? Like, give us a few days of,
Absolutely.
of what it looks like in your life.
Well, I'm exceptionally fortunate because I work at the True North Health Center in Santa Rosa, California, and there we have a fabulous chef named Ramses Bravo and his staff, and we live in California, which is even better because we've got fabulous access to organically grown fruits and vegetables. We have a 2-acre farm that we grow food for the center, and so I eat somewhere between 19 and 21 of my meals a week at the True North Health Center. We have in the morning fresh fruit, greens like lettuce, cucumbers, celery. We may have a dish like oatmeal or plantains or cornmeal. We might have a few nuts or seeds or some flaxseed. At lunch and dinner, we have a large salad. And you can always tell if the salad's big enough because if you make a salad and you don't have a scale to say weigh out a pound of salad or something, all you have to do is put it down where you work and wait for your colleagues to come in. And if they look at the salad and are shocked and awed and go, "Oh my gosh, you're not going to try to eat all that, are you? You're probably okay." But if they don't react with shock and awe, we tell our patients they've got the wrong size bowl. They got to get a bigger one. So we have a big salad, huge. And then we have a big bunch of steamed vegetables. You know you have enough steamed vegetables if somebody else assumes that's for like the whole table. And then we'll have one serving of some kind of complex carbohydrate. So potatoes, rice, beans, sweet potatoes, squashes, depending what it is, any of the types of stuff that we lay out in our cookbooks. And then if you're still hungry after you've eaten this massive volume of food, you start over and have another pound of salad. Because salad at 100 calories a pound, you're not going to get into trouble with that, but it provides a lot of satiety, vitamins, minerals, fiber. The steamed vegetables a little bit more concentrated. And then, of course, the more complex carbohydrates, the rice, the beans, these are going to give you concentrated amounts of protein and of carbohydrate to be able to function. It's a simple way to eat in the sense that it's simple to prepare, simple to do. It takes a little bit more time because you're eating a lot more volume of food. And it's very nutrient rich, but calorically low density food. And so the point is you can eat a lot, feel full, but if you're a male and overweight, you're going to lose about 3 pounds a week. If you're a female and overweight, you're going to lose about 2 pounds a week. Some people get upset because women lose about 50% less weight, everything else being equal, than men. And they feel it's not fair. They feel that it's not fair. But the fact is women largely are, if you think about it biologically, are energy conserving fat storage devices. Because the female has to survive a period of something called pregnancy, which males don't have anything to do with. And as a consequence, women have estrogen, and estrogen is a fat storage hormone. And so it's much easier if you have a higher estrogen level to store fat than if you have a low estrogen level. Men, for example, have testosterone, which is a fat burning hormone. Interestingly enough, if you inject women with testosterone, they lose a bunch of fat. Of course, then they get hairy and get cancer and die. It's probably not a good strategy. If you inject men with estrogen, they get fat and they grow breasts and hips. So these differences between males and females in terms of fat loss are largely biological, not psychological. But nonetheless, if you're a woman, essentially you have to work twice as hard for half the result. So kind of you have to get used to it.
Talking about hormones, we see obesogens or these estrogen mimicking chemicals, like in our plastics and all the horrific chemicals being dumped into our environment. And so we see men walking around with big guts and breasts, and they kind of are more weepy, and they'll cry during commercials of kids going off to college, that kind of thing. But we've been inundated with estrogen mimicking, chemicals, artificial chemicals that are endocrine disruptors. I imagine that being on your fast, you would cleanse your body of that. You would be able to remove a lot of the environmental pollutants and a lot of the things that have been stored in the body.
Well, the presumption is that that's true, but there's been limited research. Some things like PCB and dioxin have actually been measured with pre and post fat biopsies. But a lot of this other concept, although it totally makes sense, I believe it's probably true. It's still speculative because the research data isn't there to prove it yet.
Got it. Now, with the diet you mentioned, it sounds like a lot of it could be raw vegan. Do you have any feelings towards raw vegan versus just vegan in general?
Well, I'm more concerned about what you're eating than how you're preparing it. Whether it's raw or cooked is not as important as what it is you're eating. So what we advocate is large amounts of raw fruits and vegetables because, they're some of our best sources of fiber and vitamins, minerals, and water, and enough cooked foods, that is the complex carbohydrates, so that you don't get too skinny and disappear. So the idea is that the raw foods are low in caloric density but high in nutrient density, and the more cooked foods are a little bit more concentrated. But if you try to live on just, say, raw fruits and vegetables, it's not always possible to get enough total calories in without overdoing on the sugar or the fat. I mean, it's too much fruit doesn't always work for everybody. Too much fat really doesn't work for anybody in the long run. And so as a consequence, we want to see the calories in the diet sufficient, but around 10 to 12% of total calories coming from protein, around 15 to 18% of calories coming from fat, and the balance coming from complex carbohydrates. So we're definitely advocating a whole plant food diet with limited amounts of these more concentrated high-fat foods, but eliminating meat, fish, fowl, eggs, dairy products, as well as salt, oil, and sugar.
The only grain I heard you mention is rice. So what are your feelings of barley, wheat, rye, oats, a lot of the gluten grains?
Yeah. So mostly the glutinous grains are served in a highly processed form, like breads and crackers and cakes and things that really aren't so great for people that are trying to maintain optimum weight. For example, wheat berries boiled in water would be 500 calories a pound, but bread, because it's dehydrated, concentrated, is about 1,500 calories a pound. So when it comes to weight loss, avoiding highly processed foods, including whole grain breads or highly processed flours of any kind, probably advisable. In the case of wheat, remember the wheat that we eat today doesn't even bear any resemblance to the natural wheat or the kamut or any of these kind of grains. We've manipulated these grains to the point where the yield per acre is somewhere around 10-fold higher. They have many more genes in them than they had in the original product. And as much as a third of the population have some type of gluten sensitivity. We know that only 1% of the population develop frank celiac disease, where the body's immune system attacks the colon when exposed to gluten and destroys the colon. But another percentage of people have gluten sensitivity, and some people are suggesting that that might explain the increasing incidence of Hashimoto's thyroiditis. That although some people's immune system won't attack the colon, it may attack the thyroid. And it's more than coincidental, probably, that the HLA-DQ gene that's associated with gluten sensitivity is the same gene associated with Hashimoto's thyroiditis. So the theory is if you're sensitive and you eat wheat, the body's immune system reacts. In 1% of the population, they get celiac disease. And in another percentage of the population, they get Hashimoto's thyroiditis. Other people might not get that, but they get joint pain, they get sinusitis or congestion of their sinuses that increases respiratory problems, etc. So as a general rule, we don't use wheat. Like, for example, the Health Promoting Cookbook and the Bravo Cookbook are gluten-free. So we don't use wheat, rye, or barley. But we do use things that are non-glutinous grains like quinoa and millet and other non-glutinous grains. And so not everybody necessarily is sensitive to gluten, but enough people are. And usually those products are served in a form that probably isn't that healthy anyway, that we just eliminate it from the foods that we're eating.
Love your answer. What do you feel about, or what do you think about intermittent fasting? This idea that we could maybe go 18 hours a day without eating, and also see the benefits of fasting.
Well, so this is a very interesting situation. In fact, I'm currently co-authoring a book with Dr. Mercola, which deals with this very topic of fasting and intermittent fasting. So we'll be talking about the use of intermittent fasting, short-term modified fasting, short-term water-only fasting, as well as medically supervised water-only fasting. And the differences are real simple. Intermittent fasting may involve, for example, reducing your feeding window, as you mentioned. So maybe you don't eat before, say, 9 in the morning, and you don't eat after 5 or 6 at night, which would give you, maybe a 14-hour or even up to 16 hours of fasting each and every night. And the theory that Walter Longo and others have postulated is that even this brief amount of fasting is enough to induce some of the metabolic changes associated with reversing aging and helping the body maintain a higher level of health. And one of the things it certainly seems to do is help some people eat less calories. So if there's a narrower feeding window, you may be able to more easily reach satiety with whatever diet it is you're eating. And anything that helps you reduce your total caloric intake is likely to be helpful if obesity and the diseases of dietary excess are part of your picture. So intermittent fasting, that is narrowed feeding window, might be really good. Now, some people carry it a little bit further. They might say 1 or 2 days a week on days where they can take it easy. They would reduce their caloric intake to 600 calories or so. That might be by taking 4 vegetable-based juices, or it might be eating, say, 2 pounds of salad and a pound of fruit a day. So 2 pounds of salad, a pound of fruit is about 500 calories. But what that does is it provides you enough glucose to meet your brain needs. And as long as you're resting and not making your muscles work too hard, the rest of the calories that are going to have to be derived to maintain basal metabolic need is going to be derived largely from fat. So we minimize gluconeogenesis by doing this modified fasting. Short-term fasting might be where you extend that period of reduced caloric intake up to several days. Now, for people that are going to do that, I want to be clear, they really want to make sure that they're an appropriate candidate, that if they're on medications, if they have health issues, they talk to a doctor that's not an idiot to help make sure that they're not going to run into more problems than they're solving. And of course, with long-term water-only fasting, that needs to be done medically supervised. Long-term water-only fasting is safe and effective if the person has a history exam, lab, and is appropriately monitored. I wouldn't recommend people undergo long-term water-only fasting without appropriate screening and monitoring.
I want to go back and just clarify what you just said, because it went by so fast. I want listeners to get it. So if someone wanted to lower their calories to like 500 a day by doing juicing, for example, like you said, as a modified fast, then that would prevent gluconeogenesis, as the liver breaking down muscle into sugar.
Right, and you need about 600 calories a day to meet your basal caloric needs for glucose. If you take less calories than that, you'll go through a process called gluconeogenesis, where the body's breaking down protein. So the idea is you want to reduce your total glucose demand by resting. Okay, remember your biggest burner of glucose is your brain, and the next is your muscles. So if you're like trying to exercise, I wouldn't recommend severe calorie restriction, because what'll happen is if you burn more, if you need more sugar than what you provide, you'll get that from breaking down protein. If you reduce your energy expenditures, you're less likely to mobilize as much protein stores, because what you want to be doing is burning fat, not your muscle stores. When you go on water-only fasting, the brain, first of all, it has to be done not only under supervision, but in a state of rest. Because if you're doing water-only fasting and you're too active, you will definitely involve more gluconeogenesis or breakdown of protein. But if you're resting, it's interesting, by the end of the second week of fasting, over 90% of calories are thought to be derived from the mobilization of fat, because the body does this really tremendous conversion process where it changes even the brain's fuel from burning sugar to burning fat. So if you're going to do total fasting, you can get into mostly fat mobilization if you rest. If you're doing short-term fasting, that is modified fasting, you're still getting some calories in, enough to meet your glucose needs, but you still have to rest if you want to maximize the cleansing and minimize gluconeogenesis. If you're doing intermittent fasting, that shouldn't be a problem, because you're getting your caloric needs met during the day. You're just not getting the extra calories needed to sustain your obesity.
You mentioned juicing. So do you, as part of either just your general overall healthy diet, or as part of this calorie restricted fasting, do you believe in juicing? Like, I don't mean like juicing a bunch of oranges, but like juicing, leafy green vegetables. Do you feel that that is a healthy alternative to eating carrots and eating bok choy and celery and cucumber and beets and kale and everything you could throw into your juicer? Because it's kind of controversial in that some doctors say no, you should only eat it, don't drink it, because then you're missing the fiber. But so many people have seen incredible health benefits from juicing.
Okay, well, here's the thing. I believe that the best solution is to eat whole foods. Okay, juicing is highly processing of low caloric density, high nutrition foods like vegetables. But here's the problem. If you ask people that are addicted to the pleasure trap to eat salad and fruits, it's disgusting, tasteless swirl. They can't choke it down because they're addicts. But if you ask them to drink juice, because it's highly processed and they pick up on the sugar and all that, they can choke it down. And so if they choke it down long enough, again, eventually their taste neuroadaptation occurs, and then they can eat salad and they can eat fruit. So the only reason I see using juicing is just as a bridge to help people that can't eat whole foods because they're too addicted, to being able to get something in while their body's neuroadapting. Certainly after water fasting, good foods taste good. And if you go on juices for a while, that may be helpful to people that couldn't otherwise eat whole foods. But honestly, if you could eat the same 600 calories of whole foods, I think you'd get the benefit not only of the calorie restriction, but you get the fiber, you maintain bowel movement, you get all the benefits of whole foods. That's probably superior. But if you're not going to do it, then perhaps the use of juices as a transient means of bridging the person's gap is an improvement. The other thing is there are some people that can't eat, for example, raw vegetables. They've got inflammatory bowel disease. If they eat too much raw food, it stimulates the bleeding and problems. And so juicing may be a way of getting some of the nutrients in without overloading the body's capacity with the fiber. Some people were actually trying to gain weight. So we might use some vegetable juices as a way of getting extra calories in that they couldn't eat, because if they eat too much whole foods, the truth is one of the benefits of the raw food diet is you get so filled up, you just don't overeat as much. But if you're trying to gain weight, that may be an issue. So again, we have to modify the diet to meet the person's needs and give up a lot of these preconceived notions that don't actually have any clinical basis. One of the advantages we have at the True North Health Center is we're not just talking about it, we're actually living with our patients. So they're there for weeks, months, and sometimes even longer. And so if what we're saying works, we can see that and prove it clinically. And if what we're saying isn't working, we can see that or prove it clinically. And so that's one of the advantages of having an inpatient facility, is you can actually find out what really works, not just what theoretically works or what somebody thinks ought to work, what actually does work. And what does work is understanding that health is a result of healthful living. And healthful living involves diet, sleep, and exercise. So if you want to get people healthy, you have to feed them healthy. They have to get appropriate activity. They have to get enough rest. Sometimes we'll use fasting to speed up the process.
I love what you just said. I just interviewed Dr. Esselstyn. I haven't published it yet, so it's going to come out after this. I sort of decided the order of which on the fly, but he said no stevia. He said no sugar and no stevia. And I thought, what are you talking? Don't take away my stevia. Stevia is great. And he said no. It stimulates that part of the brain, that the sugar receptors. Any artificial sweeteners, all natural sweeteners, anything sweet that isn't, or like a whole food, like there's an apple, I'm going to go eat it, right? If it's adulterated in any way, it stimulates the sugar receptors in the brain, and it makes so much sense that you want to down regulate that, bring it back to normal, back to like what we're supposed to be. Because and I've gone through it too. My husband and I, 7 years ago, we couldn't sit down and eat a plant-based diet, and now my husband, as of January 1st, has gone completely vegetarian, eating whole foods, and getting our protein from legumes and beans, and we love it, and I cannot believe it. But years ago, before we went sugar free, before we transformed our taste buds, we would think McDonald's is delicious and the salad is disgusting, and now it's the opposite. Now my taste buds would just run away from McDonald's and run towards that giant gorgeous salad. And I can't believe how delicious, if you cut up some vegetables and saute them, how delicious they are. It's like candy, beets and kale and garlic and onion, and mushrooms. It's just like candy. It's so delicious. But it took a transition. It took like that sugar detox to reset my brain. And so it makes sense that to really help someone reset, to not do any sugar, including stevia, and to not do juicing. But if they absolutely can't stomach it, to do juicing as a way of just helping them transition. So that makes sense.
So we're talking about neuroadaptation, the fact that, food is disgusting, tasteless swill at first, but over time it gets better. Now, with salt, for example, it takes the average person somewhere around 4 weeks, according to the scientific literature, to neuroadapt to a low-salt diet. With fat, it takes almost 3 months for people to fully neuroadapt to where they feel satiated without the fatty diet that they're used to eating. With fasting, this happens much more quickly. So people come in, they can't stand the food, but then after they fasted, the same food tastes much better. And so, that's one of the real advantages to fasting, is you can get people willing to eat good food that otherwise wouldn't even consider it. And it's not changing the food that you have to worry about, it's changing the palate. That's why, things like stevia, they say, well, it's somewhat less bad than something else. Something being less bad doesn't make it good. It's just less bad. And so instead of trying to continue to placate the addict's palate, you have to get the addict to clear the palate. You don't tell alcoholics, well, just drink beer and wine, you'll be fine. No, you say you got to stop drinking. So if you're dealing with obesity or the disease of dietary excess, you have to stop putting the chemicals into your body that's fooling your brain and keeping you fat, sick, and miserable. And if you do that, the body does what it does best, and that's heal itself.
It's incredible. I want to wrap my brain around, what does it look like to go through your clinic? So you've mentioned that they're fasting, they're drinking water, and that they're seeing one of your medical people twice a day. So see a doctor twice a day, and they have to rest. What do they do? It just
We have an extensive, what I call, brainwashing campaign. They call it an educational program. And what happens is, first of all, the way it works at the True North Health Centers, they go on our website at healthpromoting.com and they complete what are called the registration forms. Then they're eligible for a free, no-cost phone consultation with me, and I'll help them determine whether or not they're a candidate for what we do. And then when they come in, they'll see one of our doctors that's not an idiot, and they'll go through a full history exam evaluation. And then when they're here, they're seen twice a day by staff doctors to make sure they're still alive, answer their questions, monitor them carefully. We have an extensive educational program at morning at 10, afternoon at 2, evening at 6:30. They go through classes, everything from yoga, meditation, body use, to cooking classes, to lectures with the doctors. So we're going to try to fully inculcate them into the reasons what they're going to need to do, why they're going to need to do it, and how they're going to need to do it. We also have an extensive video education program that they can watch on interests of their own topic that they go through at their own place, and then they see the doctors again in the evening. When they're done fasting, then they're feeding. We have a fabulous chef, Ramses Bravo, and he prepares excellent variety of health-promoting food that's completely vegan, SOS free. And then we get them exercising and engaging with each other. I have 60 people here from around the world, so there's a lot of our patients are very interesting. And then they go home and we ask them to stick strictly to the program for 50 years because we ask for a 50-year compliance. After they've had 50 years of compliance, then they can do whatever they want. Now, I just
Oh,
wanted to mention, you mentioned one of my heroes a few minutes ago, Dr. Esselstyn. And there's a few guys out there that have really done, I think, really brilliant work. Dr. Esselstyn is certainly one of them. He was the person, even before Dean Ornish, looking at a whole plant food diet and the effect it had on reversing cardiovascular disease. Neil Bernard, president of the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, has done just tremendous pioneering work, including political work. And these guys, and perhaps another one, Dr. T. Colin Campbell from Cornell University, author of the China study, and most importantly, amongst the 300 papers that he's authored, was our study, medically supervised water-only fasting in the treatment of hypertension. And I just want you to know, I evaluate other people's intelligence based on how much they agree with me. So these guys are all geniuses as far as I'm concerned.
I like your litmus test for intelligence. I think that's right up there. Um, so do they stay at your clinic, or do they live in a hotel nearby?
No, we've had all of them. We've been fortunate to have all of them as guests at the True North Health Center.
Okay, that's great. So no temptations outside of the doors. And I've seen some pictures of your clinic. It's beautiful. So they have a beautiful landscape. That's fantastic. Now, what's the youngest age that can go there? What's the oldest age that can go there?
Well, my oldest patient was 107. The youngest, we have infants sometimes. So, it just depends on what's going on. Obviously, the course of care varies with the patient, their condition, and their capacity. So not everybody's, for example, going to undergo water fasting. Some people come in and just eat healthy food and attend lectures. And, we have a very low price point. So, we'll even have businessmen sometimes when they're in town will stay at the center because they get their room and their board and their meals and everything's less than their per diem. So, it's cheaper than the hotel in town kind of thing.
Amazing. Would you mind sharing what the cost is to do a
Yeah,
water fast?
water fasting at the True North Health Center, if you're in a private bedroom with a share bathroom, which is the least expensive way to go, is $149 a night. And that includes all fees and taxes, water fasting, meals after the fast, twice daily visits with the staff doctors, the educational program, even things like doing your laundry and taking care of your thing, access to Wi-Fi, et cetera, is all included in the daily rate. So it's really quite predictable what the cost is going to be. It's however many nights you're there. People don't have to predetermine that. They can stay as long or as short as they want. And there's no penalty because they get done early. So, we're pretty flexible because you never know exactly what ideal is until you see how the fast goes. Or if they're just doing a healthy eating program, then it's a little bit more predictable. We also are staffed. We have chiropractors, naturopaths, massage therapists. We have all kinds of health professionals that are available if needed to provide ancillary care, rehabilitation, as well as education. So we've got a very nice integrative medical facility, but it's not geared around pills, potions, powders, and treatment. It's geared around teaching healthful living, diet, sleep, exercise, and when appropriate, medically supervised water-only fasting.
So someone could go there for 7 days. They don't have to stay for a 40-day fast.
No, some people are here for a few days. Some people are here for a few weeks. Some people are here a few months. We just checked out one gentleman that had been here almost 3 years.
And what did he? What do you mind sharing? What did he reverse? What illnesses did he
He was
cure?
actually a recluse before he came in. He could hardly leave his building. Was on a lot of medications. Had major psychiatric issues. Came in and we basically did healthy living. Weaned off his medications, which took a time. Sometimes people have been on a lot of these neuropsychiatric medications. It can be a long, slow process. And now he's free living and doing great, living in the community. He still comes by and gets some meals and things, but just unwound a really, really deep hole of medical disaster and turn. It's truly a miracle when you see the before and after. It's quite remarkable of just how dramatic the body is at healing itself if you do essentially nothing.
That's really exciting. Have people? I know it's hard to say. You're not allowed to say you cure cancer. I get that, but have people no longer have their cancer after going through your
It's not that
program?
you're not allowed to say you cure cancer. I don't believe in the concept of cure when it comes to cancer or anything else. You can't cure obesity. You can lose weight and keep it off and never have it come back, but that's not curing it, that's managing it. You can't cure hypertension. You can normalize your blood pressure and have normal blood pressure the rest of your life. But if you go back to greasy, fatty, slimy, processed food, you're going to have it come back. It's not cured, it's just managed. And I'll share with you a case that we recently published in the British Medical Journal. So we had a 42-year-old woman who came in with follicular lymphoma stage 3, which is, proven by excisional biopsy. She'd been tracked for 2 years with continued progression, and had finally been recommended that she begin chemotherapy. She had CT scans that showed that she had lesions as large as 34 by 20 millimeters, and these were externally palpable, so you could feel them, just by examining her. She'd had a CT guided core biopsy. She had surgical excisional biopsy. There wasn't any question about her diagnosis. Her medical doctor, when he was queried and was telling her that she needed chemotherapy, assured her that diet wasn't going to help, that diet had nothing to do with the condition, and that she asked him, what about fasting? And essentially he said that would be criminal quackery. So she went to the oncologist at the medical school near us, and he also told her that diet wasn't going to help, that fasting wasn't going to resolve her problem, that it was time to consider chemotherapy. But nonetheless, she decided to come in and try to do a water-only fast. She fasted for 21 days on water-only, during which time her tumors disappeared. And we refed her for 10 days, sent her back to the medical school. We gave her some coaching, made sure that she was going to get a follow-up CAT scan so we could objectify it. Now, during this fast of 21 days, she lost 22 pounds. And she resolved all of the masses that were palpable. And when she had her follow-up exam, it was clear that she'd had dramatic improvement. Now, at first, she still had a little bit of a low white count, and they were suggesting perhaps a little bit of gentle chemotherapy might be appropriate, but she refused. At 2 months, she continued to make improvement, and by 3 months, her neutropenia had resolved, so her white counts had normalized.
Now, when you say 2 and 3 months, you mean it's post?
After she left.
Okay, so at post fast, she's now
discharge. So
right.
she went home. She followed the diet.
Got it.
So now at 2 months, she's 139 pounds, down from her fasting discharge at 152 pounds, which tells us she's been sticking to the diet. Because not only did she lose the weight from her original 182 to 152, but she's lost another 13 pounds, over the period of 2.5 months by eating healthfully. And so now at 12 months, she's now down to 132 pounds, which means she's lost another 7 pounds. So she's maintained all of her fasting weight loss, plus another 7 pounds over that course of that year. And her CT scans now, fast forwarding, at 2 years, she's completely cancer-free. So there's no evidence of cancer on her CAT scans. Now, at 12 months, I thought, well, I should write this up because it's pretty impressive, to go from large cancers to no cancers, immediately after fasting. So I thought, well, if we're going to write this up, I might as well try to submit it to a really big medical journal that has a big impact. So I called up my colleague, Dr. John McDougall, who I imagine you've probably interviewed.
I have not yet, but now he's on my list.
Yeah, he should. And I said, hey, John, I've got this case that, with lymphoma. And he said, well, why don't you submit it to one of the journals? And I said, yeah, I think maybe I'll try to submit it to the British Medical Journal. And he said that probably wasn't a good idea, that, they weren't going to publish it. You got to go be more realistic and submit it to a lower impact journal. So given that advice, of course, I immediately submitted it to the British Medical Journal. And after some back and forth, they agreed. And last December, they published this case report. But before it came out, I wrote to the oncologist at the medical school. And I said, dear Dr. So-and-so, I said, thank you so much for all the confidence you showed in referring your patient with lymphoma to the True North Health Center for medically supervised water-only fasting. And as I'm sure you expected and anticipated, your patient's gone into full remission, and we're so looking forward to working with you in the years to come and tracking her long-term success. Now that our paper has been accepted for publication in the British Medical Journal, we'd like to invite you to sign on as co-author, since you're her treating oncologist.
Oh, genius.
Of course, it's been
Genius.
2 years and I haven't heard back from him because I'm sure he's busy. But nonetheless,
That is epic.
Here. She came in for follow-up routine health prevention fast this year, and she continues to do really well. But the thing I have to say is she is compliant. And I'm quite confident if she went back to the lifestyle that she was living before fasting, that she would be able to remanifest her cancer, because I don't believe it's cured. I believe it's managed. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the hardcore realities we have to come to terms with. The whole the model of cure, I think, is maybe misleading.
Oh, absolutely. I totally agree with you. You demonstrate the there's two types of thinking. There's the allopathic thinking, right, which is that diseases happen, right, and that you're in this box called disease, and you either have it or you don't. And that is totally, it's totally made up. This concept of disease and being labeled is made up. It's the body's expressing symptoms as a cry for help because it's out of balance, and we help the body come back into balance and give the body the food it needs, the nutrition it needs. The body heals itself, it does the work, and then it no longer expresses those symptoms. And if we can take away all labels, we're left with a society that either is in a state of ill health or in a state of health, right? It's either building health or it's deteriorating. And I love that you really are living, I can see the lens in which you speak. I can see through your lens, which is the holistic lens. And that's how we need to think. We need to get rid of the dogma, the labels that we've been given. I am a diabetic, right? Or I'm a, whatever. I'm an alcoholic. Like we own it. Like that's just something that's happened to us and it's part of us. Or I have asthma, and people think they need to be on drugs the rest of their life because they have this disease as though it's a part of them. And it's this amazing how they created this marketing to brainwash people into thinking you have a disease, you need this drug. When diseases are man-made, the concept of defining a series of symptoms as a disease is a made-up, man-made thing. Because in nature, you have symptoms, and then you get healthy, and you no longer have those symptoms. So, and if you start doing the unhealthy lifestyle habits again, like the eating the bad foods, then you start to express those symptoms again. So, I love what you do. This is fantastic. Now, you have people routinely no longer have diabetes, no longer have type 2 diabetes by going through your program, your medically supervised fasting. What happens to those who have type 1 diabetes? What kind of benefits do they receive by going through your program and diet?
Type 1 diabetes is a completely different condition. In type 2 diabetes, you have insulin, you make insulin. In fact, you have more insulin, not less insulin often. The problem is there's insulin resistance. So fasting reduces insulin resistance. And therefore, most of our type 2 diabetics can achieve normal blood sugar levels and eventually eliminate the need for medication altogether. In type 1 diabetics, you've actually had your body destroy your islet cells. Your immune system attacks your islets of Langerhans and the pancreas that produce insulin, and now you no longer make insulin. Type 1 diabetics are not going to be fasting because you need insulin in order to be able to adapt to the fasting process. And it's very, very tricky trying to do water fasting with exogenous insulin treatment. So typically, our type 2 diabetics are treated with modified fasting and dietary change and exercise. And this can help them bring their condition under control. So you might be able to go from being, say, unstable on 100 units to stable on 25 units, but it's not going to necessarily make you insulin free unless you're a type 1.5 diabetic still making insulin, and it's enough to kind of kick things back into target. But most type 1 diabetics are going to continue to require exogenous insulin therapy. So our approach is going to be diet and exercise, not necessarily water fasting in that condition.
Got it. So those with 1.5 diabetes who have a like an autoimmune component to
Right.
their diabetes, because you've already expressed that through your fasting and then of course appropriate diet, that the body resets itself and no longer the immune system's no longer breaking down those organs.
Yeah, we do get significant improvement in those, but it's not a cure. The idea is that you're dying. You'll be dead in 600 months or so, no matter what you do. The question is, can you delay your death till your full genetic potential? And more importantly, can you delay your debility? The average person spends 9.6 years debilitated and up to 17 years in ill health. What we're not telling people they're going to live forever. What we're telling them is we want to live till you die. You don't want to find yourself unable to talk or move, lying in some nursing home bed waiting for somebody to change your diaper. You want to live fully functional and independent until you reach your genetic potential, go to bed one night and not wake up. And the best chance of doing that is to avoiding the heart disease, the stroke, the diabetes, and the cancer that are causing people to be debilitated. And the best way to avoid those conditions is to live healthfully, because these are conditions of dietary excess. They used to be called the diseases of kings because it was the wealthy elite kings that got these conditions. We can largely reduce our odds, although maybe not completely eliminate them, of developing many of these conditions or delaying the onset of these conditions through making good choices about how we live. And that's what we're about, is trying to teach people how to live healthily. Our True North Health Foundation is a 501c3 nonprofit foundation. Its mission is public education and research. And so we're interested in researching particularly the role that fasting may play in helping people recover their health, and the role that a whole food, plant-based, SOS-free diet can play in helping sustain health, and the other things that patients can do to improve their lot, improve their sleep quality, their exercise, etc.
That's very exciting. Now, of course, no exercise during a fast, but after the fast, when they are eating your diet, what exercise do you think is healthy? Any exercise, or do you have a specific recommended exercise program?
Well, some of that depends on the individual patient. For example, you may have different recommendations to a 103-year-old person that had some knee arthritis than you would from a 25-year-old in terms of what type of aerobic exercise they're going to do, how they're going to build strength, flexibility. So you want to work on all these different aspects when it comes to fitness, but probably one aspect is walking, hiking, biking, or swimming, some type of aerobic activity that gets your heart beating, builds cardiovascular health, dissipates stress. And another is strength, flexibility, and balance. So we want to do usually things within your own body, or perhaps with some exogenous stimulation like weights or something. But the idea is to learn to use your body properly, sitting, standing, moving, lifting, bending. So we build flexibility, we improve balance, and we build strength. And it doesn't take that long to do a program. And we have doctors on our staff that are experts at helping train our patients in things that might meet their particular body needs. For most people, if they get a good walking, a little bit of stretch and flexibility training, they're going to meet most of their needs that they're going to have for exercise fitness to sustain them throughout their life. Now, some people, like myself, I have more risk-taking desire, and so we engage in maybe sport like basketball. I play basketball 4 times a week. I don't know that it's the safest thing to do, but it's certainly the most fun. And so, and that kind of works on everything: strength, flexibility, balance, aerobic conditioning. And but you don't necessarily have to engage in higher risk sporting behavior in order to achieve the accomplishment. Walking, hiking, biking, swimming all work really well at helping people recover and build their fitness.
Very cool. So is that Doug that you play with basketball 4 days a week?
Yeah, I play in a league, and I play with Dr. Lyle. The frustrating thing with Dr. Lyle is he just always beats me. And so, when I play with him one-on-one, but I play a lot of full court 5-on-5, and that's a whole different kind of interaction.
So your childhood friend Doug became a doctor as well?
Yes, he's the clinical psychologist at the True North Health Center, and he's the co-author of The Pleasure Trap, and he's the person that helps us in so many areas, because he's probably the smartest guy I've ever met, and just helps us, keeps us in line, and of course criticizes everything I say and do if I get anything out of line, so he keeps me from making too many mistakes.
It's wonderful that you have your best friend working with you and challenging you, and you guys keep challenging each other. I think that's a great dynamic. I'd love to have him on the show as well, because that book sounds fascinating.
Oh yeah, no, and he'll make a good interview for you, because he talks a lot about the psychology, about why it's so difficult to lose weight, keep weight off, how to deal with all the energy vampires that you're going to interact with. Energy vampires, by the way, are people that do what they do best, and that's make other people as fat and sick and miserable as they are, so by comparison they don't have to feel so bad.
Mm.
So, and he's really responsible for the content of the True North, for the Pleasure Trap. If you read the first 2/3 of the Pleasure Trap, it's really all about the psychology issues. The last third is more about fasting and some of the issues there. But for those of you that haven't read our book, The Pleasure Trap, I will guarantee you that you will find it a disturbing book. It will not tell you what you want to hear, but it will tell you what you need to know to understand why it's difficult to get and stay healthy.
No, it sounds like being pulled out of the Matrix.
Yeah. I'm really proud of the work that we did in that book in terms of identifying a lot of the principles that drive it. It's not really like any other health book that people read.
Very cool. And was Dr. Lyle also in the I Thrive docuseries?
I'm not sure.
Oh, okay, because I know that they did a lot of filming with a lot of amazing doctors, yourself included,
Yeah,
obviously.
there's been some other movies. Forks Over Knives, I think Dr. Lyle is in that. They had the What the Health, which is one of the more recent ones, was largely filmed sections of it at the True North Health Center. In fact, it's interesting that there was a number of patients filmed in it, and I've seen a bunch of stuff coming out now that says those people were all paid actors, and that it was. Yeah, I thought, oh, in fact, I've had patients calling up saying, "Hey, wait a second, I got well and I didn't get paid. What's going on?" You can imagine how shocked I was to find out all these years, all my patients are actually just paid actors, and I didn't know it.
That's
But
amazing.
it's interesting. Anything that gains some popularity, they've got to come up with disinformation stuff and try to discredit and stuff. But I can tell you, those were not paid actors. Those were just people they happened to pick out of the courtyard on the days they were there filming.
Now, as someone goes through a fast, you recommend 40 days as long as it's medically supervised. Are there certain milestones that happen? Like you said, by day 3, they're not hungry. But
I
in
don't
terms
recommend
of,
40 days. I recommend whatever's appropriate for the person. The
got it.
vast majority of people are fasting, between 5 days and 3 weeks. There's only a small percentage of the population that require a really long fast like that. We do not want to fast any longer than is necessary to get the problem solved.
Oh, understood. So if someone went and 5 days into it, their problem was solved. Like, what kind of problems could be solved in a 7 week long fast or a 5 day fast?
Well, many of our patients that, for example, forget about a 7-day fast. I have a lot of patients because right now the center books about 2 months ahead. So people are booking in April or May right now, and now it's February. So what we do is we work with them on coming up with a program before they come in to get them ready for fasting. And I can't tell you how many people by the time it's time to come into fast, they're already better. It's so annoying, they just go and get well without me having anything to do with it. And so, because health is a result of healthful living, fasting may help you make that transition. And I have to say, there are some conditions, despite people's best efforts. They've done the diet, they're doing the exercise, but they're still having problems and they need help. In fact, Dr. McDougall, our colleague, says we're the punishment. If somebody doesn't get well, he'll say, "I'm so sorry, but you have to go over to Goldhamer's place and do the fasting because, you're not responding well enough to diet alone." So that's why they say the sign should say True North Health Center, the last resort. But the bottom line is some conditions only require a short intervention. Others require a long intervention. Some require many interventions. So some people, it'll be the third fast before we get them well.
Besides high blood pressure, diabetes, autoimmune disease, and cancer, what other conditions do you commonly see people no longer having?
Well, obesity is certainly a common one in metabolic syndrome. So elevated lipids, elevated blood pressure, elevated blood glucose levels. And remember, autoimmune diseases are pretty broad. So it includes, things like rheumatoid arthritis, ulcerative colitis, ankylosing spondylitis, lupus. You've got asthma, eczema, psoriasis. You got vasculitis. There's a lot of conditions. If you think of autoimmune disease, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and conditions like lymphoma, you just identified a huge percentage of the people that are getting sick and suffering and dying prematurely in industrialized societies. It's a big hunk of the chunk. Not everything responds to this approach. You mentioned type 1 diabetes, that yes, the diet and lifestyle is critical, but fasting wouldn't be appropriate. There are many conditions, including some neurological conditions, that wouldn't be maybe appropriate to put a person on a water-only fast. Other contraindications to fasting would include irrational fear of fasting. If a person is too afraid, that may not be a good time to put them on a fast. There are people that have conditions of depletion, cachexia, that wouldn't be good candidates for fasting, and people that are on medications that you can't stabilize them off of, because we do not fast and don't recommend fasting for people on medications of most kinds. Sometimes you can get away with hormone replacement therapy like thyroid replacement therapy, but most medications would be strongly contraindicated during water-only fasting. And so you have to be able to first successfully manage people off their medication and get them stable, then consider the fasting. And that needs to be done carefully because these drugs are very powerful. And some of them can take a long time to safely withdraw, and too rapid a withdrawal of medications can be health compromising or even fatal.
Mm-hmm. When the body's detoxifying, so they're going through a 5 day fast or a 20-day fast or whatever they're going through at your clinic, do you also have them do things like enemas and saunas and lymph drainage massage? Like, do you have them go through processes that support the body in removing these toxins?
We try to avoid all these exogenous treatments, as well as the pills, potions, and powders, because they don't actually augment, they detract from the body's ability to make a safe and effective adaptive response. You don't need to give the body a liver cleanse. The liver cleanses itself intensely and vigorously itself. Ask anybody that's gone through fasting. You don't need to do bowel laundry stuff and irrigating the colon, because the body will eliminate what it needs to eliminate while it's fasting, even during fasting. And the more you stimulate the colons and the more you stimulate the autonomic nervous system, the more sluggish they tend to be post-fasting. So I'm not saying there's not some exceptions where you'll do say a pre-fasting bowel treatment or something in a given person with a certain history, but generally what we're trying to do is minimize all of this. Sometimes people have some symptoms that come up in fasting that prevent them from continuing to fast. Maybe they get some back pain, and so we might provide them some relief, whether it's a hot pack or a chiropractic treatment or something, so they can kind of get comfortable enough to get through the fast. But I'm not that interested in whether a person is comfortable. I'm interested in whether they're getting well. And a lot of times what you do to make people comfortable actually slows down the healing process.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, like
And
if you
so-
gave them a pain medication, that would obviously slow it down.
Well, yeah, that would be strongly contraindicated, because these pain medications will start burning holes in stomachs and creating a real mess. So we wouldn't be doing that or screwing up their kidneys or liver, because we do understand the toxicity that's associated with many of these medications, even over-the-counter medications. And honestly, this is the kind of mistakes that people make when they undertake fasting without supervision, is they don't really appreciate what a delicate balance they're getting involved with, particularly with long-term water-only fasting. It's safe, it's effective when it's done right. It can be a bit of a problem when it's not.
Now, what about kidney disease? Do people see, while going through fasting, an improvement in kidney output, or is kidney disease a contraindication to
If
fasting?
you have enough kidney disease, you may not be able to do water-only fasting, because you need the kidneys to be able to compensate for the detoxification load. So, for example, if creatinine levels are above a certain level, or if the GFR is below a certain level, we might have to do modified fasting, maybe juice fasting or modified feeding, in order to be able to stimulate detox, but at a slower rate, so the now compromised kidneys can keep up with it. If you take a person with severe kidney disease, put them on a water-only fast, you could conceivably shut down their kidneys, overload their kidneys, and that could lead to death or debility, and that would be really bad on our outcome data, so we don't do that.
Now, you are incredibly successful helping people lose weight, helping them no longer have obesity as their issue. And we've sort of discussed hunger and not having hunger. What about leptin as a leptin resistance? Is sort of, now they're kind of coming out saying, well, the reason why people can't lose weight even if they go on diets is leptin resistance. So
The really exciting things in fasting is, according to Walter Longo, publishing in the Journal of Metabolism in 2015, fasting dramatically increases leptin, the satiety hormone. It also increases insulin sensitivity. It increases cellular stress resistance and stress adaptation, which means that cancer cells don't like the fasting state, probably because of their higher metabolic rate, and it helps protect healthy cells against the ravages of things like chemotherapy. Fasting increases autophagy, which is the body's ability to eat up cancer cells and get rid of debris. It normalizes the gut microbiota. It stimulates B-cell immunity. It actually reverses all of the major abnormalities of metabolic syndrome. At the same time, fasting decreases, obviously, glucose and IGF-1. Insulin growth factor 1 is associated with aging and cancer. It goes down in fasting and it goes down in exercise. Fasting decreases blood pressure, heart rate, insulin, inflammation, oxidation, total microbial load. Fasting is really an amazing process at giving the body a chance to heal itself. And what's interesting is if you look at these biomarkers associated with fasting, like IGF-1 or brain-derived neurotrophic factor, the chemical associated with preventing Alzheimer's disease, there's two things that we know improve it. One is exercise, and two is fasting. And you'd think, why would fasting do the same thing that exercise does? When fasting, you're resting, and exercise, you're active. But it turns out both of them may be reversing the consequences of dietary excess. And so whether you're fasting or you're exercising, you're helping reverse dietary excess consequences, and that may be why some of these biomarkers are improving both with fasting and exercise.
They should have a reality show. They should just take The Biggest Loser and go to your clinic.
Well, actually, we have a film crew coming in this week from England, one of the big TV channels, and they're filming this next week an initial view with the hope of doing a documentary looking exactly at that. They want to bring in a bunch of patients with diabetes, film them before, during, and after. And so we may actually have a documentary that's going to be filmed looking at exactly at these factors.
That's really exciting. Now, what you're proposing is that people can get all of their minerals and all their vitamins from the plant-based diet. What about the fact that farmers don't remineralize their soil anymore, so
Yeah,
that certain soils deplete? How do you
yeah.
compensate for
Well,
that?
well, two things you want to remember. There are most plants have certain minimum nutrient levels in order to produce their product. So just the fact that the tree can make the apple gives you at least minimal loads of most nutrients, not all, and we'll talk about those. But for example, when we do nutrient breakdowns, and we've done that in the Health Promoting Cookbook, where we break down each nutrient in the diet as well as each amino acid, et cetera, even using commercially available data, data from the USDA, which is commercially available produce as it's available in the stores today, there's really no problem getting most of the vitamins and minerals, even on soil that may not be optimum. Now, granted, if you get organically grown food on soils that are raised properly, you have an even higher level of nutrients, which is great. But getting enough vitamins and minerals on these diets is not really the issue, with the exception of vitamin B12. Without the high B12, B12 comes only from bacteria. When you eat a meat diet, you get a lot of bacteria, not the least of which is from the feces contaminating that meat. So without the dead, decaying flesh and highly processed food products, your total B12 intake is going to be lower. And over enough years, you could conceivably deplete B12 in vegans. And we recommend 1,000 micrograms a day, which is a tiny little bit, but 1,000 micrograms a day of methylcobalamin to make sure you get your B12 needs net. And that's the only absolute vitamin supplement that we recommend for all vegans. If your vitamin D levels are too low because you don't get enough sunshine or you live too far north to make enough vitamin D, you can supplement vitamin D. There are other nutrients that some people might want to consider if they're having clinical symptoms, whether it's DHA or iodine or whatever. But in general, you're getting most of what you need from your whole food diet. And pills, potions, and powders play a relatively small role in the spectrum of care for our patients.
It has been absolutely wonderful having you on the show. I love what you do. The links to your clinic and your books that you've discussed here today are going to be in the show notes of today's podcast at learntruehealth.com. Is there anything else you'd like to say or a message you'd like to leave the listener to wrap up today's interview?
If you want to be healthy, you have to pay the price and live healthy. Living healthy means eating a whole natural foods diet that's free of sugar, oil, and salt, exercising appropriately, and getting enough sleep. If you do that, you'll be so healthy you won't have to worry about all the stuff that everybody's trying to sell you.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure having you here today.
It's my pleasure.
Hello, True Health Seeker. I have a very exciting announcement. I have spent over a year, I've spent about 14 months collecting all of my information that I use with my clients for ending anxiety, and I created an online program. I'm very excited about it. We just launched it. And for you, for free, I have a webinar where I teach you 2 powerful mind tricks for removing anxiety, ending worry, and controlling fear so it stops controlling you and your life. In my free webinar, you will learn what causes anxiety and how to stop it, the science behind the mind-body connection, overcoming fear of public speaking, getting unstuck, ending that fear of things not working out, ending procrastination and overwhelm, and feeling excited, grounded, and calm instead of fear and worry. I have so much to teach you in my free webinar, and I'm really excited for you to come check it out. Go to freeyouranxiety.com/webinar. That's freeyouranxiety.com/webinar, or look in the show notes of today's podcast and you'll see the link there so you can jump into the webinar and learn all these wonderful, powerful tools that will end your anxiety and create excitement and happiness instead. Go to freeyouranxiety.com/webinar and sign up now, and I look forward to seeing you in the next live webinar.